Okay, well, welcome everyone. This is a webinar sponsored by First Five Lake, and we are so very proud to be able to host it. And at First Five, our vision is that one day the success of Lake County and our state is going to be measured by the well-being of our youngest children. And our mission is to build up the early childhood systems and supports that are needed so that all of our kids are healthy and ready to succeed in school and most importantly in their lives. So our webinar today is a step in that direction as we turn our attention to the art of community engagement. We know that the protective factors are present. When they are present, kids are safer and their well-being and their family's well-being increases. And so today we're going to focus on the protective factors of social connections and concrete supports in times of need. And those are all things that are enhanced when we have community volunteers who are trained and competent and engaged. And so that's kind of where we're headed today, is around volunteerism and engaging our community for the good of children and families. And we're super grateful to have our partnership with Lake County Child Welfare that makes this possible, as well as Chabot Las Positas Community College District. So they're funding this training today, and First Five is hosting it, and it's been a wonderful partnership. We're grateful for it. And we will also, surprise, we didn't advertise this, but we are going to make a book available to each of you who are participating today. We will send you out a link at the end of the webinar for an evaluation survey. And if you complete it and you're interested in receiving a book about our favorite neighbor, Fred Rogers, and his life and the inspiration that he provides, then we would be very happy to send that to you as our gift. So stay tuned for that after the webinar. Go ahead and keep yourselves on mute unless you have a question or you want to put something in the chat. You can do that too. And that's kind of how we'll proceed. We are recording the webinar and we will post the link to it later today on our First Five Lake YouTube channel. And we will email you that link as well in case you want to share it with others in your agency or people you work with in the community. So without further ado, let me introduce our main speaker today and my friend, Hope Forti. She founded Families Together in 2017, and she did that after her first experience as a foster mom almost led her to turn in her license. 4 years and 4 kids later, Families Together is matching isolated families with helpful, friendly volunteers through a neighbors program. They're doing that in Colorado, in California, in Texas, Illinois, and Michigan. And Hope and the neighbors team say that matchmaking volunteers is their offering to the world to combat the crises of mental health and loneliness, especially across our nation. And Hope is a dear friend of mine. She now lives in Colorado Springs with 4 generations under one roof. And she's juggling homeschooling, first grader, and keeping up with a 2-year-old who wants to be in the marshmallows all the time. And she has a lot of help from grandma and grandpa and great grandma. And we are excited to learn from her and from her team. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Hope.
Thank you, Carla. We're so happy to be here. I will share our presentation and get us kicked off. I also have to introduce you to Mitch, and we'll get started in just a second here once I get the PowerPoint up. I'm really grateful everyone came, and I'm so glad, Carrie, that you like the idea of getting the Mr. Rogers book. That was Carla said, do you have a book about community engagement that we could give to people? And I thought, this is the best one I know. It's not very technical, but it sure is inspiring. So we do have our neighbors program, and that name is inspired by him. So thank you for coming. Mitch is going to kick us off, and then we'll introduce ourselves a little more and tell you all about what we think you could learn from what we've done to bring it into your own community. The things we're doing are not unique. We're not the first people to think of them, but we do think it's something special that could be for absolutely any area around the country or the world. So Mitch, take it away.
Yeah, welcome everybody. And so as you can see by the title here, we are going to discuss today the art of community engagement and specifically strategies for building a sustainable volunteer support program within your own community. We're going to use our neighbor program that we've developed as a reference. And so we just want to emphasize the idea, and we'll emphasize this as we go throughout too. But while we're specifically referencing our own neighbor program, this model, this community support model can really be implemented in a variety of different types of ways, depending on your organization, your structure, and the services that it is that you're trying to provide. And so we'll go ahead and get started here. So we just wanted to do a brief introduction of who it is that we are, right? And so Carla, thank you for that intro that you gave us there. And so my name is, as we mentioned, Mitch DeVito. Mitchell, you can call me Mitch. I have about 8 years now experience, dual degrees in community engagement, mental health support, case management. And so specifically in the areas of housing and homelessness, higher education support, and my degrees are both in the area of refugee and migrant mental health support. And so I have a few years of experience helping build community engagement programs for specifically the refugee and my international refugee and migrant communities. I joined Families Together this year to help manage the Neighbors program, and kind of shifted my focus from the refugee and migrant community to foster care, adoptive kinship, and early childhood support through Families Together. And so I was brought on by Hope, who is the director of Families Together, and I'll let her give an explanation as to who she is.
Thanks, Mitch. Yeah, I'm going to share my story more in a minute, but I am coming to you from windy Colorado Springs. And if my internet goes out, Mitch and Carla both have the presentation and Mitch can carry it on. But it's like electricity is flashing on and off here right now. So I'm really hoping we can get through. It says tornado level winds today. So yeah, I'm just looking at my notes here for a second. My background is also really as starting from a community volunteer. Foster parents aren't exactly volunteers, but that was my first introduction into this world of social work. I came in as just like a regular person trying to help, not with some degrees or anything like that. And so I think Mitch and I can bring a unique voice to this of both the super professional side, and Mitch is going to share more of his personal story in a little bit too. And then also the side of just kind of that bleeding heart, which I think is a lot of the reason that so many of us have gotten into social work or trying to be involved in our communities. And we really feel like we have, in all of the systems that are around child welfare or poverty or homelessness, we have a lot of systems and we have a lot of people who care. But what we want to share today is about helping to give families those friendships and those natural connections and supports that might not be part of the way the system plans to support them yet. But we think that in the vision for the world that we have, they can have professional supports right alongside plenty of friendships and plenty of natural connections. So with that, Mitch, I believe, is going to share a little bit more about what we'll learn, but we want to ask you first what you want to learn. So we have a poll ready to go for you.
Yeah, Georgia, if you could throw that first poll up there for us. And this is just going to be to kind of get an idea of expectations and what it is you hope to have learned from the webinar here today. So if you could take a few minutes to fill that out for us.
And Georgia, can you share? I thought I could see the poll results, but can you tell us what they're looking like as they come up?
Okay, now I'm not muted. I was talking to myself over here. It looks like so far everyone's very interested in how to bring their local community into their work, followed by how to build a care of culture for caregivers. Yeah. And it looks like everybody's completed that. So let me see.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it looks like overwhelmingly how to bring local community into your work with families, which is really fantastic, because Hope and I are going to discuss that quite in depth as we go out. So of course, we will do our best to answer any questions. If you have any questions, feel free to submit those in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer those as we go. And anything that we can't get to during the presentation, we'll address in the question and answer round at the end. But please feel free to engage with us.
Yes, we love live back and forth. It makes it way more exciting.
Yeah. And so, yeah, so as we discussed here in the poll, these are going to be our initiatives of what to talk about, the tips for building cultural care, the long-term benefits of a grassroots program, and improving community engagement skills. And so we'll go ahead and start it off with, again, our program is based in the foster care realm. And so how we developed the Neighbors program, thought it would be a good idea to talk about how that formed and what the needs that we were trying to address specifically. So Hope, why don't you go ahead and share your story from a foster mom?
Thank you. Yes, so as Carla mentioned, just as a little teaser for you, my first experience as a foster mom, 7 weeks in, and I was ready to quit. I was ready to say, I think this is too hard for anyone. I can't believe they trained me for, I think I got 23 or 27 hours of training and then dropped off a kid. And I didn't know, I thought I was just ready to infuse all this love and healing into their lives. And I think the amount of mental health crises that were happening in a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old were so overwhelming that my husband, who's pictured here, and we ended up doing what we felt like was the biggest failure a foster parent can do, which is giving notice on the kids after 7 weeks. And I think that was especially humbling because we were young and starry-eyed and like ready to change the world. And so I started asking myself, like, you know, in those 9 months where we didn't take any children because we were afraid we would do that to another kid, and that was to us like the worst thing we could do. We started talking about, he and I started talking about what could we do to have this burden of child welfare, and not a burden because children are not a burden, but this intense work of child welfare and of helping children heal from trauma be more of a shared load rather than a few people who our society loves to call angels and saints and heroes. Having that load, couldn't we share it more between people who care? And maybe there's more tiers of being involved with foster care than just not involved or fully fostering and then adopting kids. What if it was a spectrum of involvement? And we started talking to people. We did a lot of sort of focus groups and surveys, which we'll talk about a little bit later here too, asking other foster parents what could be useful. And as we started having those conversations, people told me, well, maybe you could do something like build an app and then put like gift cards from local businesses on it, and foster parents could go beep, beep, and get their free thing for the month. And that would be appreciation and support for them. And I thought, it's nice to have some conveniences, but I think what's really missing here for a lot of families is relationship. It's like when I have a baby or somebody I know gets cancer, I have a social circle who there will be a meal train filled up in 10 minutes. But what I was seeing for foster families is their social circle had burned out long ago because they felt like they're just going to keep bringing kids through and we're supposed to keep showing up. Like, we can't keep this, not sustainable. But I thought, well, if they're doing what I feel like has been unsustainable in my life, then couldn't the community be a sustainable community for them? And so I said, I don't think it's an app. I think it's relationships. And so we kept kind of working with this idea, eventually came up with the Neighbors program, which we're going to share with you as a way that you could potentially be inspired to do something like that in Lake County or wherever you're listening from. But I have this picture of this sweet baby and his cute little toes, if you can see poking up from under the blue blanket. This is baby Prince, and he's now 5.5 years old. He'll be 6 in May. We picked him up from school the other day, and he still runs up to my son and says, brother, I want to play with you. And the reason I have his picture here is because he opened our minds when we had him in our home, and he was our first placement after we decided, okay, we're not going to quit. We had him in our home, and we had an intense shift of perspective toward the parents of the children that are in foster care. For that situation, I think we were going and thinking, this beautiful tiny little baby, like we could adopt him and be on with our life. And then a week later, our foster care agency sat us down with his mom. It's supposed to be a 45-minute meeting, and she talked nonstop for 90 minutes, told us her entire life story. And we left that saying, I think this support that we're talking about building for foster families needs to be also for biological families, kinship families, families who are 100 yards away from being in the foster care system, but maybe if they didn't have the support, they could end up there. So it's all about, now it's much more about prevention. And we'll talk more about that too. But basically that's how this thing started. Now we're part of the Tennyson Center, which is in Denver, and they've been around for, I think, 117 years providing residential treatment, mental health care, lots of therapy services, inpatient, outpatient, for children. And they said, we want to provide something that's also so down to earth, so grassroots, in partnership with the professional clinical care that the children are receiving. Because they said they saw our vision of saying, this is not just a mental health crisis to be solved in a therapy office, but it's to be solved at home by caring for the caregiver. So we're going to share more about that today. I will just share a couple more things, and Mitch, pop in here if I forget any of the awesome things that we'd plan on saying. But one of the mottos that I've come up with for our team is that we can't fix everything, but we can fix dinner. And I think you all as professionals in this human services world understand that it is very tempting to feel like we can change the world, we can save the world, but then we feel like that on an up day, but then the next day we're thinking, why is this family still having needs for housing or cash or food or childcare? I thought we'd fix that. I thought this is how I felt as a foster mom. I thought there was a system to fix these things that then like all the cogs would work. But sometimes I think being so invested in the systems, we see how many gaps there are left. And so I tell this to my team like every single day, we cannot fix everything, but we can fix dinner. That's what we tell our neighbors. That's why we try to have neighbors coming in who are invested in the little tiny changes that affect family culture over time versus monumental, let's overhaul a whole thing. There is a place for that. We need that too. We want to work hand in hand with people who are doing that massive systems change. And we've been part of some pretty big systems change as well. But I think the encouragement is that the little things along the way actually make a huge difference to family life. So that was that story of starting everything out of our failure as a foster parent. We absolutely claimed that this was our failure. We wanted to do better by the kids. That almost 5 years ago now has turned into that we're active in Colorado primarily, but also in California. We do get to work with Lake County foster parents, Texas, Illinois, and Michigan. And we're closing in our 300th family match, hopefully sometime in the early spring, between all those different places. And in Illinois and Michigan, actually, they're starting their own version of what we do. We're not legally tied to it. We're just kind of coaching them through it. So it's been exciting to see it grow and to not hold on too tightly, because we want to see how other people might engage it, which if you can take some of these ideas to implement in your current program, we would love to hear about it and keep in touch about it. The last thing I'll say is, what's that, Mitch?
I was just going to say, Carla, I love your comment. You put small changes over time, build trust and friendship too, right? And that comes back to this idea of the motto of we can't fix everything, but we can fix dinner. When building a community engagement and volunteer program, it can be overwhelming because you face so many issues, like you mentioned, Hope, right? You're looking at all of these issues and you want to come up with an idea of how can I solve all of these issues? What kind of support service can I start? Let's start this volunteer organization and solve everything. Well, that quickly leads to burnout. Usually those programs are not sustainable. And so the idea of finding one thing that you can focus on to support families with actually in the long run really supports retention. And at the time of creating this slide, we had matched 278. Now we're almost at 290, right? And so the evidence is there of finding a small support, getting that support matched really provides sustainability in the long run, and can make sure your program lasts quite a while and encourages people to find other ways to support as well beyond what it is that you're specific through your program.
And I don't know if we'll ever get over that temptation. I mean, we still face the temptation to add a program or add a way that we could expand things, but we really, and you'll hear us say this 100 times today, we really feel like keeping it simple and clear is the key to making it work.
Reminding yourself to find a focus.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. We're like, oh, but they need this. Let's add this to the program. And like, that's great. But keeping that focus.
Beauty of putting relationships together is if a family has a unique need that like our specific program can't meet, they have a person, and we'll call this social capital. They have a person who can help spend their social capital to make that happen. We've had neighbors send kids to camp. We've had neighbors make sure that kids can get to school when there's a transportation issue. We've had people do things that are outside the bounds of what we can set them up to do, but when they start a relationship, they fly. So the last thing I'll say here is that if you haven't gathered by now, to be super clear, what our Neighbors program does is to support families via monthly meals and a listening ear. And we'll talk about this later too, but a portion of the support families feel from this is the food. It's the care package, it's the delivery. A bigger portion of the support they feel is a listening ear, someone to just vent to, someone to share an idea, and a non-judgmental presence. So it's all about the relationships. I will switch to the next one. And I'm going to share, this is an example of what that looks like in a process for us. And then Mitch and I are going to have you think, as you're looking through this, we would love some feedback because, you know, as presenters, it's kind of hard to talk for a whole hour and a half without hearing anything. So we'd love to hear some feedback, like imaginative ideas of, as you're looking at this process that we have, how then could you imaginatively pull a key out of this that maybe you could put into your own program. So the first thing that happens is a family, maybe in our Tennyson therapy program, hears that we have this to offer and they say, I want support. That's really important for them to opt into it. We'll talk more about that later. Secondly, we send them, Mitch is our matching manager. So he's in charge of, once they complete our application online, they get a 20-minute orientation. He's video. So if people can't read, we have had some families that aren't literate, they can watch that video and listen to him explain it. Sometimes he'll even call them if they're having trouble getting through that orientation. The next thing that happens is either Mitch or I will be recruiting for a volunteer that lives near that family, and then that volunteer will complete a much more intensive orientation.
Did we lose hope there? Yeah, can everyone still hear me? Okay, I'm gonna just jump in there. Oh, she's back. All right, great.
Okay, just do jump in if I cut out again. Why don't you go for it, Mitch? Because I'm still getting unstable.
No problem. So yeah, so we have, the parent completes our 20-minute orientation, and then we have a matching system that finds a volunteer, usually within about a 10-mile radius of that person. And we ask that volunteer to do their own 5-module training program, do a background check for us, and then we do an introduction for the family. We really act as the coordinator, the introducer for the family and the neighbor. We connect them with each other, and then let them know that we're there as the mediator, but really try to encourage that relationship between the two of them to communicate with each other on what the family's specific needs are, what the neighbor themselves are capable of providing for support, and determining a way to merge those two things together. But again, that's a way to develop the relationship between the two, really allow them to take that part over. Then step 5 here, you see the neighbor will deliver their first monthly meal. And this can be, in grocery delivery, it's a meal that they can cook themselves or bring to the house. And it provides a way for them to meet in person and really start to develop that relationship. The relationship will last through our program for a 6-month period. And so that was through a lot of time and effort on Families Together's part, is to determine how long the program should be. And your program might be a little bit different, but we want to emphasize that it's important to put a deadline on there. When we first started, there was no deadline. We didn't want to put that constraint, and it really resulted in a lot of people being confused at how the process works, dropping off after a couple of months, not really knowing how long they were supposed to have that relationship. And so the 6-month window wasn't decided with like, well, at that 6 months, your relationship is over and that's it. No, in fact, we highly encourage people to continue the relationship beyond the 6-month minimum. We just implemented that because it gave everyone a clear idea when they signed up as to what this program was, right? We know as a family, we'll be receiving support for 6 months. We know as a volunteer, as a neighbor, that we will be providing support for 6 months. And it really ensured the longevity of that program.
I think it made it less intimidating for any volunteers who might feel like, what am I getting into? Like, am I going to have to go to this person's wedding in 20 years? But you know, if they feel like they have an out, they're actually more, we've found people are more healthy in their relationships. So then at the end, and I don't know if you got to slide point 7 yet, Mitch, but like at the end, we're surveying people and 83% of them are choosing to stay in touch in some way and continue their friendship, even if they're not officially under our program anymore. So does that make sense to everyone? Good. All right. Well, then tell us, if you would, unmute for a moment and we'll give you a few minutes to tell us like what elements from this do you see that you could apply, whether it's one of these actual steps or just a key that maybe is part of this. Anyone?
I'll go. I think that I hear about it a lot, especially because I'm in the First Five office, and while we're hosting this, I would love to participate. I think we hear a lot about families that are in need of transportation, regardless of their, relationship with the social service department and the foster care system. A lot of families are in need of that just extra support. Lake County is very isolated, as we all know. No matter where you're at, it's kind of hard to get to the other side of the lake. I definitely think transportation would be a big one. Yeah. Sonia, did I see you come off mute?
There it goes. My computer is being kind of cranky. So the first step, the monthly meal and friendship, that's kind of built into the tribe already. We have elders meetings and general membership and town halls where everyone gets to come together, not necessarily surrounding CWS or ICWA cases, but as a whole community. But I definitely see that being more dialed into the, kinship and children living with extended family, aunts, uncles that are placed outside of the home.
Yep. I'm glad that that you spoke to that community already being built into the tribal life. And I would be so curious to have a longer conversation with you of like what areas you see that are stronger that other parts of the community could learn from, and then also areas in tribal life that could use reinforcement. I would be so curious to hear more.
Yeah, and what's great about that is having that sense of community already built in, right? Like when building a sustainable volunteer program, one of the largest steps is determining that need, right? There's a lot of communities that don't have that tribal aspect off the bat. And so they're really scattered and feeling isolated. And so we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but one of the most significant steps in building community is determining what that need is. And so if you already have that built into your community, that tribal aspect of being connected, that can really help to save a step in this process.
Yeah. And finding volunteers. And sometimes, and I'll even say, like in our work with Lake County, sometimes it's tricky to find a volunteer who doesn't know every single foster parent who's needing support. And sometimes if they already know them, and some history there that they would rather not get into. And so they would rather have a whole fresh start. And so I would feel like in the tribal area, it would be, or the tribal community, it would be potentially it's the same challenge on an even larger scale, but maybe then there's even more positive connections that could be reinforced too. So that's something we've tried to do in Colorado, is work more with the kids that have like an ICWA. And it's for us, because of our demographic of our team, it has been hard to break into a volunteer group that would be, ready to support those kids. So Sonia, did you have one more thing?
Right. No, I absolutely agree. And there are definitely pros and cons to the support in the tribal aspect, because they're sometimes because it is such a close-knit community, you have sometimes the fighting, but overall I think it's definitely beneficial for the community and the kids and the families.
Yeah, it's what I think a lot of people that don't have a connection like that wish for, that there was something built in. And for example, I think part of the reason I had the idea to start something like this is because I grew up in, I didn't have really an ethnic culture group that I belonged to, but my church was kind of like that for me. And so that was why it was normalized for me to have so that was I guess our village growing up. And I've just realized, knowing now people who do or don't go to church or somewhere on that spectrum, they don't have that. If they don't have that built in, something like neighbors could be really powerful for them. Thank you for that, Sonia. Chris said rising gas prices will make transportation more difficult, especially in rural areas. I wanted to highlight that because what we have found, there were so many applications when COVID started. And so I think people rally around a problem. Often when there's a local community problem, and I think highlighting rising gas prices are an issue, especially for us in Lake County. We have to go, so many of us have to go to Santa Rosa or Sacramento for our healthcare or our mental health care. Let's figure out something that could ease that burden as a community. And having, I just think the power of grassroots in that, rather than it coming kind of from the top down, is what makes all the difference. So.
Yeah, and it's just something that I've noticed here recently in my specific neighborhood is we live in a food desert. And so the nearest grocery store for us is about 8 miles away. And on the note of rising transportation costs, our local transportation district just raised the cost of bus prices. And so you already have people who the bus right off the bat takes forever, is not the greatest transportation option, is now more expensive. And so they most literally don't have the capacity to get to the grocery store. As the weather gets colder, asking someone to walk 8 miles in each direction with a boatload of groceries when they have a myriad of other things going on in their lives, right? So all of these can impact the community. And again, translates back to speaking with your local community and finding out what that one general need is that you can meet. And so maybe providing access to more reliable transportation, or providing bus tokens, things like that, or, just again, finding that hyper-focused specific need for your community.
Justin, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add real quick that when this is over, we like to use this step model a lot in building our own volunteer program. And so we'll go ahead and send this out to people as well. And you can use this as a reference when this is over, as steps that you could use to apply towards building your own community support program.
And I know Justin and then the group from, I think I'm saying it right, SELPA, we're off mute for a minute. If you want to say anything, feel free.
Just recapping pretty much what everybody else already said. I really love the idea of monthly meals and keeping it simple and clear in terms of what you're doing, how you're meeting with people. It's funny because sometimes you get into the pattern of trying to talk to people, but I think it's just as important, if not more important, to take the time to listen and build true relationships, not just surface level relationships, but really in-depth relationships. I think is really key.
Solid point, Justin. Yeah.
Anyone else, and we'll move on. I'm so glad we have 4 people from the SELPA group. That's really cool.
Yeah, and this is great feedback. Everybody really appreciate you commenting there. This helps to move the conversation along.
We do have 4 people in from the SELPA. I'm your senior SELPA director. I've been here a year and a half. Lake County is sparse, rural, and I have our program specialist here and our other program manager. Is this first 5 movement and your elements of work, it's so important that we know and we could share the information you're doing, as well as if there's other Monday and other things that we could do with transportation, with that partnership. We are very happy that we're learning your systems or what you have. This is so important, or what you need. So when we get calls, we know how to traffic people to the right people, trigger them, all of those things. So thank you for very much for doing this work, all of you in Lake County, and for bringing the PD.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We would be happy to schedule some time with you too later to talk more specifically about that as well. That's our passion.
Yeah, that first 5 office is pretty powerful, 2-woman shop. So we appreciate them a lot and all they've done to help spread the word too. Okay, so great feedback, love it. I think when we were preparing, Mitch and I were worried no one would talk. So we're so glad that people are engaging and this really is resonating. So the next slide, I'm going to share the first 4, and these are for us, the tips that anybody could use to do something similar to what we're doing in your own way, with your own program, in your own, family dynamics. So first one, focus on matchmaking, not fixing everything. This is about, I don't think I said this in my intro, I meant to. There are people, this is what, bottom line for me, this is why Families Together exists. There are people out there who need support. There are people out there who are itching to give them support. They just want to help a kid heal, or help a kid avoid the same abuse that they went through, or help a mom avoid feeling trapped in a domestic violence situation. They want to do that, but they don't know how to find that person. And then that person needing help doesn't know how to find that support person, or is afraid to ask. So we just see ourselves as a facilitator and to say, if you want this, here it is. And we cannot force it down anyone's throat. We'll talk more about that later. Number 2, keep it simple, practical tasks. Think about what one thing, if you're going to keep it simple and spread it out, what one thing could help the most people if one person was doing that thing for them, because you're going to have to replicate this for multiple families. And so you want to make it something that gives them a simple starting block for their friendship. Number 3, clear training and orientation to set expectations. You want to make sure people know what they're getting into and what they're committing to. And then the 4th one is geographic proximity. So you saw, I think on step 4 or 5, we're looking for volunteers. We try to keep it maximum 10 miles apart. Some parts of Colorado are rural too, so we have to do longer, or we might ask, hey, you might live in Denver, but you go to the mountains every month for something. Could we find you a family near there where you go in the mountains? So we have to be creative sometimes, but we find that geographic proximity is like truly when someone's literally your neighbor, you're able to care more because you have more in common. You have more that you connect about. You have some of the same problems because you have the same city council. You have some of the same hopes and dreams because you have the same school district. Whatever it is, there's mutuality you can connect on from living close to each other. Mitch, you want to cover the last 3?
Yeah, and I just, to jump on the geographic proximity there just a little bit, because of my experience running the Neighbors program, it's important to set that expectation at the beginning when you're forming your volunteer program, letting people know in the application process as well as the training process, multiple steps along the way that we ask for a 10-mile commitment, right? You might be asked to go 10 miles. In most cases, we won't ask you to go much outside of that, right? But then also communicating with people on a case-by-case basis when it comes to geographic proximity. I had very recently a family who we found them a neighbor who turned out to be on their same street. And initially for us, this is like, wow, this is so exciting. Look how close they are together. I can't believe that they were right by each other this whole time. Well, when I communicated with the neighbor, they were hesitant to match with that person because they were afraid, well, what about my personal boundaries? this person lives on my same street. I'm going to be seeing them every day. If the relationship doesn't necessarily go the way that we both anticipate, that could backfire. And so wasn't necessarily comfortable with having someone so close, was willing to go a little bit farther to provide the service. So just setting the expectation from the beginning that this is what we expect of people, but then also communicating along the way that we're flexible with this. Let us know what your preferences are, right? Keeping that communication aspect open.
And didn't you match someone yesterday who's 2 streets away? So it felt a little bit more private, but
yeah,
close enough.
I called it the Goldilocks zone, right? It was just right. The distance was just right for that match, you know? And so that kind of leads us into the next idea of space for customization, right? And so it's very important that, again, you set expectations. We're doing a meal delivery. It's once a month, every 6 months. It's within 10 miles, right? Setting those expectations, but also being open to realize. And so, yes, staying within the bounds of specifically like our meal program, but we found that for some neighbors, the meal that works best is breakfast time, right? We're too busy. We have 5 kids to get ready every single morning to take them to school. I don't have time to get up and cook a meal for 5 people. So communicating that to the neighbor of, specifically for this family, can we focus on breakfast time? Right? We want to focus on breakfast burritos. One of my favorite stories is, and we hadn't thought of this along the way, while our program is focused on meals, we had a family reach out and say, I love to cook. We're doing well with meal support. What I'm overwhelmed with right now is I have 4 kids to do laundry for all the time. I don't have time in my week to do 4 loads of laundry every single day. We communicated that to the neighbor, and the neighbor came up with the idea of, well, why don't you throw your clothes in a bag and leave them on the front porch for me? And I will take them to a laundry service for you once a month. And so this neighbor was bringing that laundry, having the laundry done in the individual loads of the child, and then folded in the individual child, dropped off. And this family, then all they had to do was take each stack and put it in each individual child's area. And it just really helped them out. So while we focus on meals, for this family, the meal wasn't exactly what they needed. And so we found a service that was within our bounds. It was still within the once a month visit, 2 to 3 hour commitment, right? Encourage the relationship. Didn't go out of the bounds of, we weren't in childcare, we weren't in transportation, which is not the need for our group, but still help to serve them, right? And so just focusing on that space for customization. And then that kind of leads into the check-ins from coordinators and not micromanaging. These two are kind of interrelated, right? We do act as the mediator, and that's important that you, when developing your own volunteer program, are there to help mediate between the 2 groups, right? And so you don't want to be overwhelming, though. You really want to encourage the relationship between the community and those in need, right? And so you're here to, the way that we do it is once a month, we send a feedback survey to both parties and say, hey, just give us some information on how this relationship is going. Is there anything that you want us to know that we can help to improve, right? And so not micromanaging the 2, not getting involved in every little minutia, saying, well, let's help you arrange this, let's help you arrange that. Leave that up to the family, but at the same time, be there to provide support. And so every 3 months, every 90 days, we do a check-in call as well with both, just to give that personal touch, that voice, right, of that personal, let us know how things are going. But then again, really let those 2 develop that relationship on their own. It does happen occasionally, it's not often, but neighbors will fall off. They'll just stop communicating with the family. Families get overwhelmed and lots of things start happening and they forget to continue that relationship. And so that's what you're there for. You're there to act as the mediator between those 2 to, if a problem arises, to help address that problem, but really to kind of back off and not get involved in every aspect of the relationship.
And I love what Carrie said. We have to be willing to listen to the needs of the family and not focus on our own agenda. And that's exactly what we emphasize in our training. That's why our training for volunteers takes 2 hours, because we're like, just remember, this is not about you. It's about the actual real life human being family in front of you.
Yeah, it happens. It happens on occasion where I will have someone volunteer. I'll have a neighbor sign up, and they'll say, well, I'm available on Monday from 4:30 to 5:30, and I'm only willing to do this. And if you can find me someone that's within exactly 1.5 miles of my house who's available on every other Monday, and I have to remind them that this is not about you, right? We're not going to create a need for you. There's a need that already exists. And if you want to help meet that need, that's what this program is for. But we're not going to create a need just so that you can feel valued in your community, right? Yeah. And so I love that, Carla. It's funny because it's true. Most, I would say 99% of volunteers, they are willing to go anywhere, do anything. They really want to help. But then you get that small percentage that's like, I'm only volunteering because I want to make myself feel better about myself. I'm that type of person that does volunteer and I want to feel good. And that's not what this community volunteer program is about. And we have to remind ourselves of that. And so that actually is a great segue into our last point of keeping the connection, the friendship there, right? Like listening at the core. Like Hope mentioned this earlier, that yes, what we're providing is a meal. Yes, what we're providing is a laundry service, but that is a small portion. The focus of what your program is offering is friendship. People feel isolated. They feel overwhelmed. And you're here listening to all of you talking about Lake County specifically, is this idea that Lake County can be isolated, right? That it can feel isolating. And so the core is to provide a listening ear, is to provide a friend that these people can call and say, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed. We could really use that meal, but I could really use someone just to come drop that off and spend an hour with me hanging out, right? Like being the friendship at the center. And so we jumped ahead a little, but that's okay. So that'll segue nice into our next slide here, which is a story from a foster youth. So I'm going to go ahead and just give a brief history of my own involvement with families together. And it really stemmed from my involvement in foster care. So I grew up in the Colorado foster care system myself. I was one of the 440,000 foster youth in Colorado. And as I grew up, I really developed a relationship with my biological mother. Once I emancipated out of the system, I developed a relationship with her, and we talked quite frequently about that time in our lives and what led me to being in foster care in the first place. And time again, what came up was the lack of support. When we discussed what Families Together was, my mother would tell me, if something like this had existed when I was a mom, maybe you would have never wound up in foster care in the first place. And so that really stresses the need for these types of volunteer programs within your own community. It may seem that it's a very small resource, but in the end, something as simple as one meal a month, something as simple as a ride to your court date, a ride to your job, a ride to your school, like something as simple as that compounds and can really have the impact of preventative care. My mom saying maybe I never would have wound up in foster care in the first place. This is that idea of preventative care of let's intervene, let's build this program in our community to try to prevent people from getting to the risk situation, to getting to the crisis situation in the first place. And that relates back to this idea of when I look back on my own experience in foster care, there were a handful of people who I still remember to this day as being integral to my success in my adult life. And those were people who were involved in programs similar to this. I remember a very specific individual named Jamie who took a very high interest in my life, in my personal life, and was constantly checking in with me. Hey, Mitch, did you fill out the applications for college? hey, Mitch, did you apply for the rental assistance for when you're going to get your own apartment? How is that going, by the way? Have you found any apartments? Can I help you? Like, this one individual really took an investment through these community engagement processes. And now in my adult life, he's the person I remember most as providing that support. So again, just imperative to build these community volunteer programs because they can really make a large impact in the end. And so that kind of introduces us into the next segue here. This is a testimonial we have from Ben and Lauren, one of our neighbors, who you've heard from Hope now about the impact on a foster mom. You've heard from me on the impact of a foster youth. We wanted to talk about the impact from the volunteer themselves. And this kind of leads us into the idea of Carla. She was a neighbor for our program at one point. And so we thought it might be a good idea to have Carla speak on how these types of community volunteer programs look from a neighbor, from a volunteer perspective.
Yeah, thank you for letting me share. I was privileged to be a neighbor to a single mom who's also a foster mom for a year. And I have to say that the first thing that was different about this program as to other things that I engaged with as a volunteer was the training. It was a real wake-up call for me as a volunteer, because I certainly wouldn't count myself as someone who just volunteers to make herself feel better. However, it does make you feel better. And so it's there whether you acknowledge it or not, that sort of savior complex. And so when I went through the training and it was sort of described that the power is shared in a good relationship, but in this type of relationship in particular, especially at the beginning, the real power lies with that family that you're serving. They get to choose. They decide the parameters of that. Are you going to come into their home and hold the baby while mom unpacks the meal you just brought? Or are you going to leave it at the doorstep and text them and say, your meal is here? Because one of those things might be helpful to one family and one might be horrible to another, right? Like they're looking for different things and they need different things. And we have to be open and we have to communicate to our volunteers and not shy away from telling them the reality of what we're asking them to do. And I felt so empowered and so challenged after going through the training that I wanted to be that kind of volunteer who was just going to show up, and whatever that family needed, I wanted to be able to surrender to that, regardless of whether it made me feel good or not. And thankfully, I had been primed for that with a relationship with a friend previously who had gone through cancer treatments, and she needed meals for her family because she just couldn't get up. And she put a cooler outside the gate of her home, like zero contact. And we were dropping off meals in this cooler, never seeing her. And she needed to keep herself healthy. But that was sort of priming the pump for me. Like, can you give even when there's no human contact, even when you don't get the benefit of it? Anyway, so that was a huge part of
that's such a great point, Carla. That's such an amazing example. When the shutdown happened, when the lockdown happened, Tennyson Center let us know that our program was one of the only programs left that they offered that was able to continue providing support. It was because of what you just said. It created the ability for people, put a cooler outside, put it on the front porch. You never even have to engage with that person if their health is a factor, if that's what's important to them. Such a nuanced but amazing way of creating a volunteer program.
Yeah.
That's so great.
No, that was super important to me as a volunteer to feel equipped to walk into it with my eyes wide open to what I was getting into. And the accountability portion of this, if you're going to be putting together or tweaking your own volunteer program, I found the accountability having someone call me or text me or email me from Families Together and just say, hey, how's it going? With no judgment, just like, hey, how's the relationship going? It reminded me that there's a purpose behind this, because you can fall into a rhythm and a routine and not really think about what you're doing. And it just helped me to reevaluate sort of every 90 days, like, okay, yeah, there's someone who's got eyes on this, and there's someone who's engaged in, in really wanting to see this work, not just me. And so that accountability helped for sure as well. But anyway, I'm still friends with that mom. And even though I don't live near there anymore, and she went on to have another neighbor, and it was just a fantastic experience because we both had our eyes wide open from the beginning.
That's amazing. And I love the point that you just made about having families together there, to talk to have that, 90-day communication. And that piggybacks on Carrie just made a comment about the idea of families are sometimes afraid to ask for help. Well, neighbors are sometimes afraid to ask for help too. Like, it creates this sense of like, well, they're going to think I don't know what I'm doing, or like, what if I get overwhelmed? And like, just this idea of having reminding yourself to be that when you're developing a volunteer program, so that both neighbors, families, so both volunteers, the people in need that you're serving, have someone there that they feel comfortable with communicating with, and don't have any fear that means the program's going to end, that I'm a bad parent, that I'm a bad volunteer. It doesn't mean any of that thing. It's a safe space for you to come communicate with the person organizing the program, so that it runs more efficiently, so that people are getting served better, so that neighbors know what they're supposed to be providing to people. And it's just, again, just imperative to have that aspect in your program.
Yeah, and the other thing that volunteers have said to us time and time again is that for our case, with foster care being a focus at the beginning, this was one of those things where people said, I can't foster, or I don't want to foster, or it's not the right time, but I want to someday. This has been something that has helped them get into the culture of fostering, get in someone else's shoes, and not go in like I was at 23 years old, thinking that I had, my 27 hours of training and I was going to be able to handle anything. And yeah, maybe it would be hard, but I could power through. Like, actually seeing what defeat looks like in a foster family, or in the life of a family who's trying. We have a decent number of single moms who've exited domestic violence recently in our program, or a family who's struggling with food insecurity or homelessness. To see what that's like, one, increases their true empathy that they can have, because they actually have a name and a face. It's not just a problem. And then two, how could I get more deeply invested and involved beyond this 2 to 4 hour a month commitment of being a volunteer? And we share this with foster agencies when we work with foster agencies, because they're always looking to recruit excellent foster parents who won't burn out. And we think we've actually had, maybe 7 or 8 neighbors go on to complete licensure and become foster parents with this along their route, because they felt like it equipped them more. So thanks for listening to Carla's story too. It's really encouraging to have somebody in Lake County who gets it. So these are 3 keys to how we can, I'm just making sure this is my slide, Mitch.
But just real quick before we get into it, if we could, Georgia, would you mind throwing that second poll out there for us?
Yes,
so
thank you. This is why you're here.
We just wanted to get a good idea of what type of support service would most benefit your community. Just brainstorm a little bit. We're not looking for anything like, exactly, just to get you thinking about, if you're going to build your own volunteer program, what types of things. We mentioned transportation was mentioned earlier. So just take a few seconds and see if any of these fit for you.
Helping connect to resources. That's another one that we've seen.
Yeah.
Many people request. It's like resource overwhelm sometimes. It's like all this stuff and you just can't even.
When I worked at the university, one of the things that we focused on a lot was helping. It seems like maybe it would be easy for most people, but it's not. The SNAP application, the food benefits application, food stamps app, so many refugees and migrants, English was not their first language, and they just had a major challenge filling out the application. And so just something as minor as helping someone find a resource, connect to a resource. Yeah. So it looks like, wow, meal drop off, grocery delivery, child care respite. That's a big one for us too, that we hear a lot over and over again, is the need for assistance with child care support. So great feedback, everyone. Really appreciate that. So as you can see here, we've determined that there are really 3 major keys for a family-centered volunteer support program to build a successful program. And the first one, and we're going to get into these more in depth, the first one is asking your local community what they need. We've mentioned that here now several times. Not being the one to determine the need for someone, asking what that need is. And now this here, the building a culture of care, we'll get into that more in depth, because that seemed at the beginning, you all answered that that was something that seemed very meaningful to you in your own community development. And so we'll focus on that. And then the ever important, keeping the process simple and clear. So let's go ahead and jump in, and we'll start with the asking your local community what they need. So this can look different depending on your specific community, but these are actionable things that we have developed, worked for when building our program. And so gathering a list via surveys or a focus group, it's not easy to get people together, right? You can't always get your community together in one room to ask them to talk, engage. That's difficult. So creating a survey to send to your community, creating a valuable survey or focus group to get people's active participation, listen to them, right? And when you do that, you're going to see that the needs are many, right? There's going to be, wow, that was Star Trek. The needs are many. And so you're going to see that the feedback you get is a lot from people, right? And so the second step is going to be taking that information, getting that list, getting those surveys, the info from the focus group, and narrowing it down. Find what the 1 to 2 most common things that people mention are, and develop which one of those might be the easiest for your development program to reach. You don't have to fix everything. You can just fix dinner, right? And don't feel bad about that aspect, right? When you narrow it down to the 1 or 2 things, when you look at that and you go, well, this is the easiest one for me to reach, but does that mean I'm not really helping the community? Am I picking just the simplest one? Like, no, start with something simple. Find the one that is the easiest for you to do. And I guarantee what you're going to find in the long run is that the impact is going to be tremendous. Starting with that one simple ask, meeting that need, there's going to be a tremendous impact from that. And as it says here, that's going to help build an early stage relationship. Wow, if they were able to meet this one need, if my volunteer was able to meet that one need, maybe we can develop that relationship more. Maybe we can find out more in the long run, right? So starting simple. And so,
yeah,
again,
so many people here in Colorado have been asking for respite, and respite is just so challenging everywhere we look. And so what we decided was, I mean, you can barely even get insured to do it. So what we decided was, let's just put people together. Once they graduate from the program, they have a relationship that they can build that into. So,
and it's happened no, it's great. It's happened so many times where, people reach out and they say, my biggest need is childcare. I need someone to sit at the house with the kids while I go out and run errands, do these things. And I communicate to them. Unfortunately, that's not what our program is for. Our program is specifically for meal drop-off, grocery drop-off. Is that something you'll find valuable? Because we'd love to offer that to you. And hey, by the way, at the end of the 6-month commitment, when the graduation time comes, if you and your volunteer are getting along well, then there's room. Once the program is over, there's room for you two to come together and talk about that. And many, many do. Then they get that childcare aspect. And that helps on several levels. That helps ensure that the neighbor knows that, hey, for the first 6 months, I'm not being asked too much more, right? I'm only being asked this, but hey, maybe at the end of it, I will be able to provide that. It really gives time to develop a relationship, right? Because relationships, you're not going to have a successful relationship with somebody after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, right? Giving them the 6 months to communicate with each other and develop that relationship provides the room for future support, right? And so specific examples are, our meal drop off and stuff, but you saw that can be anything for you guys. Just think of when you're brainstorming, when you're coming up with ideas for creating your own community, think of that list that we sent you. Cool.
Sorry, they don't train me in how to forward PowerPoints, so
That's okay.
you're having to deal with my skills here.
No one noticed. Cool.
All right, so then the next thing is we're building the culture of care for the caregivers. And I think Carla, I think earlier in the chat said something about like drop-offs or like, you know, a giveaway is a one-time thing, but a relationship is forever. And I think especially at this time of year, we have so many Christmas gift drives, teddy bears. I think I always joke to my team, I think they're probably tired of it, but like, I'm always snarky, like, in social work, they don't have to pay you. They just give you like a garage full of teddy bears to hang on to for the rest of your life. I've been given things so many times. People are like, hey, do you know someone who could use this? My favorite was, and we actually did end up using this, but like a box of 100 tie-dyed aprons. So eventually we used them up, but sometimes those things sit in our garage. I think we can all relate. But these ideas of people love to give things to kids. And I think what we'd love to shift toward in the culture that we're building with Families Together, and that I hope you'll all build, continue to build, because I know you already are, is care for the caregiver, because that isn't an effect that will last much longer than a teddy bear or a toy. And I think the more we can help people to see that, yeah, like giving the gift feels so good. I'm buying 2 things for somebody at my kid's school who, you know, a family in need that the administration had identified. I'm not against that. I think it can be beautiful. I think it can be a great start to something. And it's a good way it's one of those simple ways that you can help a family feel less alone. But long-term, we want to build a culture of care for the caregivers. Stability and reliability is the most important gift we could give to a kid for their caregiver, their parent, themselves, if we're talking about more of a mentoring program, because that will make things happen, like Christmas gifts, if there's no Christmas gifts down the road. Those relationships can make the giveaways happen, but we can't always facilitate a relationship when there's a drop off a present type of thing. Again, not knocking it, but we want to encourage the larger culture toward supporting caregivers, because I think we talk so much about self-care, right? And what we need to actually think is foster mom after foster mom has laughed in my face when some training has said, oh, you need to take a bubble bath or get self-care. She's like, wait, in between what screaming rage and what 6 therapy appointments am I going to be doing my bubble bath? And it's just a joke to them. So how can we care as a community, care for that person? Promoting caregiver mental health will very quickly trickle down to the child's mental health. A caregiver who feels isolated, very quickly going to trickle down to the child feeling isolated, and long-term effects of that. We're helping to lighten the load for them. Many of these families feel like they're drowning. Some of them feel like they're so underwater that they can't even sign up for something like this. And then the other thing is that this prevents abuse. We've talked about earlier the CDC, I didn't mention this earlier, but we've talked about how this can be a protective factor against abuse and neglect. None of us who have kids or work with kids need to be told this from the CDC, but the CDC does cite family isolation as a risk factor for child abuse. And there's also research, I think it's in the Journal of Social Work, that cites that community, someone else in the home, friendship, essentially, is a protective factor against child abuse and neglect. So again, none of us are surprised by that, but I think it's important, especially as we're thinking about building these things, talking to funders, making this part of our system and our state, how our state runs, all kinds of programs. It just, it makes a lot of sense to care for the caregiver. I wanted to share a story that I hadn't shared before. My husband actually died 3 years ago, and almost 3 years ago in March. And when he died, it was a tragic accident, and awful, worst day of my life. And I wake up and there's like 20 people in my home that I don't know, and everything smells like cheese because there's just casseroles filling up the fridge. And I was newly pregnant, and so I was nauseous anyway. And I just remember, I will never forget the smell of casserole. And so, you know, in the very early days of a tragedy, or the early days of someone being a foster parent, or the early days of someone reaching out for help because they're homeless, people are excited to jump in. But then I'm thinking of some of the kids that we've sent home after foster care and they've reunified with their moms. Like, everybody in our community is excited to support them for a few months. And then they're like, wait, they still need help. And what happened in my life is, yes, some of that faded away. I actually have amazing friends. I have people who still text me, you know, how are you doing? It's Christmas, whatever. I don't have any lack of that. But what really stood out to me was one woman from my church, a year after my husband died, she said, hey, I'm going to show up every Monday night with dinner. And she did for a year until she moved to another state recently, every Monday night. And I remember, like, being a newly single mom, having a newborn, grieving, having somebody show up with dinner every Monday night when I was also working full time and just in the frazzled Monday night grind of it all. It was like, oh, she's coming tonight. And it truly lifted something up in me. And I would say like 25% of what helped was the actual food. And 75% of what nourished my soul in another way was knowing somebody was going to show up for me. And that's coming from somebody with a lot of privilege and connections and social capital. And so I just think I want to emphasize caring for the caregiver is going to affect the children. And my children looked forward to those meals. They looked forward to the lightness that we would get to have those evenings because they knew that mom was going to relax in a way. And I know it affected them
for a year, right? Like, I think the important
52 times.
That's such an amazing and powerful story, Hope, you know, and I think the important aspect to take out of that is like, look at what the longevity of community support. If your program provides this 6-month window, 1 year window, whatever it is, after 2 weeks, everyone fades away, right? When something happens, you know, everyone gets interested right off the bat, but then 2 weeks later, everyone is gone. So building a community support program that encourages longevity. This person was in your life for a year, 52 deliveries, and you still remember that. So when creating your own program, try to replicate that idea, right? Try to make sure that the sustainability aspect is there, the simple ask, right? The training aspect, the application aspect is so easy and straightforward that these people will continue their relationship with each other for a long time.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to jump in here real quick, if that's okay. CT, you asked, has there been any experience of a small group, Bible study group, college dorm, et cetera, supporting a foster family? Yes, as a matter of fact, we have several church organizations. We have a Bible study group. We have a youth group, right, that all sponsors families. And so it has proved to be tremendously effective. I just like to remind everybody that we like to keep the contact level at about 2 volunteers, right? If you're going to do that, select 1 or 2 of the volunteers to be the point of contact, because when there's 5, 6 people involved, the family can tend to feel overwhelmed by that. Well, who am I supposed to communicate with now? Who is it this week? Like, is everybody getting the message? Like, find one person as the point of contact. As many people as you want can cook meals. As many people as you want can get involved. Just to make sure that there's one person there to help act as that point so that things don't get dropped off. Cool.
Great. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Hope. I just thought it
No,
was
I love that question too. Yeah. I think at one point we had a foster mom with 6 neighbors and she was like, wow, this is great. So it works for some really well. Okay. Keeping the process simple and clear. Mitch, you want to cover this one?
Sure. And so we have been mentioning this for the entirety of the webinar, right? It is probably the most important key, is keeping the process simple and clear. Families do not need another chore. They don't need something else that overwhelms them. If they can't find time to find a bubble bath, how are they going to do one more support resource, right? Like, just simplifying the process as much as possible, right? And that the family orientation keeps expectations clear. This is imperative. This isn't something that we've mentioned up to this point, but in my work with refugees, in my work with the homeless community, and now in my work with the foster care and adoptive kinship community. So many people want to volunteer. They'll apply, and then there'll be this process where they tell you, well, I'm not sure I have the capacity for this until the end of January, maybe at the new year, maybe when my job dies down a little bit here, I have the ability in 6 months. Like, make it clear that this is not a negative thing. Because you don't have the capacity right now does not mean anything negative upon you, right? But please apply when you have the time. This is what we have. This is the program. This is the need. If you have time for that now, great, apply. If not, that's okay too. And you do that by clearly spelling out the process throughout the application, throughout the training, when you're communicating with them, constantly spell it out for people and families as well. If the person applying for support doesn't have the capacity, that's okay too, right?
I don't want to guilt anyone into it. And I feel like when I started this, and Bitch will tell you, I am still working on getting this out of my system. But like when I started this, I'd be like, oh my gosh, there's someone in North Denver who said she needs support. I'm going to go and like find a volunteer who lives near her. And I would work on that recruitment. And then I would find that those matches would, most of the time, sometimes it worked well, but most of the time they would fizzle out because I was like more pressuring the volunteer. Like, there's someone who really needs it. They live in your area. Please, please, please. And it has to be more of an open-handed, like, if anybody wants this, here it is.
Right.
And same with families. Sometimes I would find a volunteer and I would say, hey, you're a foster mom. You've got 7 kids. Come get support. And she'd be like, okay, I guess. And then would kind of ghost to the volunteer. So I had to get that out of my system. It's I'm sure like every personality in this room is going to have a different challenge with this, but that's my thing that I'm constantly trying to, Abby and Mitch will both tell you, like, I'm just trying to not do that anymore because it doesn't usually work, but I always hope that it will work.
And that just comes back to listening to your community. That just comes back to not deciding yourself what your community needs, listening to them. If a family tells you, I just don't have the time right now. If a neighbor tells you, I just don't have the time right now, that's great. Tell them no problem.
Or if they give you that vibe sometimes.
Yeah, totally. And it doesn't mean get rid of their contact information. It doesn't mean like, oh, this person's not interested. Let's put them off. We're not even going to bother engaging with this person. How we like to handle that is we set a reminder. Okay, 90 days from now, 3 months from now, we'll reach out to this person again and say, hey, we talked a few months ago, just want to let you know, we're still here. If you need that support, feel free and apply anytime. Or if you have the capacity now to volunteer, we're here for you, just let us know. And in many cases, that's when the person follows through, right? Like it's usually because they have something that's going in their lives at that specific point in time that's preventing them. But 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, they might have the capacity. So keep that contact information and keep them in the loop of things, because then in the end, that provides one more person for your team. And so that kind of leads to a nice segue of a practical rhythm, right? Neither families or volunteers should ever feel pressured to reinvent the wheel. This is what our program is. This is the service that we provide. That's all we're asking of you. You don't need to do more. You don't need to do less. For the commitment of our program, this is all you need to do for us. And that has really proven, the proof is in the pudding, right? That has showed us longevity for these programs. You're not asking anyone to come up with creative ways of engaging. You're providing that engagement for them. Here you go. Here's our application. Here's our training. This is what we're asking for. Don't do anything above and beyond that for now. And that has really proven rhythm. People really like that rhythm. One of my favorite stories is we had a family who had, 6 neighbors. And they told us the one that they loved the most was the one that on the first of the month, every month, they knew they were going to get a text message from that person. We knew on the first of every month, we were going to get a text, and that the following day, that meal was going to show up at her house. And she was like, that was our day. That was our family day. That was our day that I knew I wouldn't have to cook, that I knew that we could all sit down together, watch a movie, play a board game, because that neighbor was going to assuredly text us and drop off that meal. rhythm, right? They counted on that. After 6 months, 8 months, they knew this person was going to show up, and they have now continued that relationship for 4 years. That relationship has continued that way for 4 years. And that's not saying that every volunteer you have has to respond that way, has to on the first of the month like clockwork. It's just showing you that this rhythm really helps the people that you're trying to support. So really encourage that.
I'm muted. This is about the end, and we want to make sure we have time for a few more questions and answers. And so I just want to review. The word grassroots is on this slide for a reason. It's Mitch is going to talk about it a little bit too, but this is about, there's so many systems that these families are involved in, and we want to give them people. We want to normalize community support for kids and caregivers. One more story I'll share. A kinship mom, which means she's basically adopting from foster care her grandchildren. She called us and said, I'm applying, well, she actually, her pediatrician referred her to us, and she said, I'm applying for this because I want my kids to know that there's people out there who care about them. There's helpers in the community. There's not just bad guys out there who are, looking to hurt you. There's people there who want to help you. Actually, more people who want to help you than there are who want to hurt you. And so she wanted them to grow up with that in their brain. She wanted them to grow up knowing that they could be those helpers in the future. We have protective factors against abuse and neglect. Isolation is a problem. Community is a solution. We have making it simple for people to get involved, which means that we're going to give them the simplest thing that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. But then once their creative juices start flowing, because it's a relationship, they get to fly with it. We want to share the wealth of community. Again, when my husband died, I think I said in his eulogy, I don't like living in a world where, I mean, I guess it was kind of strongly worded, but that's what you do 12 days post tragedy, I guess. I don't like living in a world where my kids have dozens of people I could call any day who would pick them up from school or foster them, adopt them if something happened, after the long line of grandparents and aunts and uncles. And then there's other kids here who we know because of foster care, we know because of our work in the community, who don't have one. And so I want this, like the whole goal is to share the wealth of that community and make our social circles bigger. We want to have relationships that outlast a program. We want we just really believe that this is bigger than just a system.
Yeah, and I think the key term here is grassroots volunteer program, right? This is something that Hope and I have tried to reconcile since we began our work together, right? Hope is very hyper focused on the relationship aspect, the friendship, the community. I'm very hyper focused on, look how many people we can reach. This is such a great model. This volunteer support program is such a great model. It can be replicated. We can reach a ton of people. It can be large scale. Reconciling those two things. You don't want to be Facebook. You don't want to lose track of what your initial intent was, right? Your initial intent is to provide support for families. So keeping it grassroots, allowing yourself to grow, allowing yourself to reach as many people in your community as you can, but remembering that the point is, it is community. It's to create friendships amongst people who are already there and already exist. Don't let yourself lose sight of the grassroots aspect, the community aspect, right?
Beautifully said, beautifully said. Are there any questions or answers now that we have just a few minutes left? Or we have answers, do you have any questions? Or do you have suggestions? Things we should think about adding to our program?
Hi, this is Carrie. So I'm sitting here and I know that, you're focusing on the foster parents. Are there any programs that serve just families? Because, I know here we do the differential response for families that are struggling. But I mean, something even before differential response, having been a single mom for over 20 years, I was sitting here and I was thinking, oh my gosh, that would have been amazing had there been like this program for me when I was going to school, working 40 hours a week, had 2 kids, and, and there was no support, and I mean, granted, my oldest is 26 now, so this was a few years ago. But have you guys ever thought of that, or do you have a program? Can we start one in Lake County?
Yeah, Carrie,
Yeah.
It's great that you're talking about that. I think I referenced a little bit earlier when I was talking about my experience in the foster care system with my mom, how she had mentioned if this support was there preventative before child services had gotten involved, we likely would have never wound up in foster care in the first place. And so the answer to your question is yes, while we are referencing foster care here, that's how Families Together got started. Our program is now dedicated for anyone who needs support. Any family member, it can be an aunt, it can be an uncle, a brother, a sister. They don't have to be in foster care. They can be biological, kinship, a friend of a friend. Like, we will serve anyone. And I think you bring up a very valid point here that this type of program can easily be replicated for a support system for anyone. It doesn't have to be hyper focused in the foster care realm. It can be dedicated to, as simply as something you just said, anyone in the community at any time who needs a friend, an ear, a meal, is struggling. Expand the community that you're serving to anyone in need.
Right.
And I will say too, that we're right now in our 3rd year of contracting with Lake County to do this work. The first 2 years, I believe it was open to differential response families. And this year it's only the contract that only reads for foster families. Carla and I were just talking about this today. The challenge with new programs in Lake County, even though it's 3 years, it is still difficult to communicate with the people who need it. And it's still a challenge to network so that people know that it's available. Even us coming and doing trips and doing things to make it more obvious. But I'd love to chat with you more, Carrie. You have had so many great thoughts for us today. So I'm going to see if I can get your email from Carla after so we can keep the conversation going.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I'll put my email in the chat real quick.
Oh, thank you.
I know we're out of time, so.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's a bummer. This has been going.
You all made it fly by. Thank you for your thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop recording and thank you all for coming, and we will leave the room open if you have any further chats or comments or anything else.